Hi, fourth graders, and welcome back to Sun Devil Learning Labs. Today's lesson is another lesson on text structure. Our focus today is compare and contrast. This is for fourth grade ELA. Let's begin by going over today's objective. Our objective today is, I can recognize the characteristics of the text structure, compare and contrast. So today we're going to be focusing all on compare and contrast and how this text structure looks in differing text. So take a moment to read today's objective out loud or read it in your head and really focus on what we will be learning today. Let's go over the text structures one more time. A text structure means it refers to the way a story is arranged or organized when it is written. Text structure refers to how a piece of text is built. So our text structure, you can think of our text structure as the house for our text. The text structure is the way that our text is built. It refers to the way that the story is arranged and the way that it is organized. So this week, so far, we've learned about chronological order and sequence. Today's focus is compare and contrast. And then two more text structures that we will learn about this week are cause and effect and problem and solution. So again, today's topic focus is compare and contrast. So compare and contrast. The author compares and contrasts two or more similar events, topics, or objects. So when we're comparing something, when we are thinking of compare and contrast, our author is comparing something and then contrasting something that is different through similar events, topics, or objects. When we're comparing and contrasting, things can be similar and things could also be different between the two topics or objects that we are looking at in our text. So the text discusses similarities or differences between people, places, or things. When we are comparing and contrasting, we are looking at what is the same and what is different in our text. And it also shows how two or more things are different and alike. So through comparing and contrasting, we're picking out the similarities between something and the differences between something as well. We're looking at not just similarities and not just differences, we're looking for both of them. So what is the importance of compare and contrast? Compare and contrast is an important skill to understand within reading. It helps us to organize information more efficiently. So through being able to understand the text structure of compare and contrast, we as readers are able to organize our information in a more successful way, in a way that makes more sense for us, because we could take the information and group it into similarities and group it into differences. And we're able just to look at that. We're just really able to go in and look at that as a whole and look at the information in an organized way, which will help us to better understand the information of the text. Also, an important skill in our everyday lives. We are comparing/contrasting things every day. Whether we realize it or not, we are comparing and contrasting things every day in our lives. We're looking at similarities between some things. We're looking at differences between some things as well. And again, this is something we're doing in our everyday lives. So we're taking it into our reading and we are using it through reading as well in text structures. So let's look at compare and contrast clue words. As you read, look for clue words that can help you identify similarities and differences between subjects. So when we're reading, we should really look for these clue words as we're reading, because these clue words could help us be able to realize that the author is comparing and contrasting something in the text. So for compare, some clue words are similar to, alike, same as, resemble, as well as, and both. Some clue words for contrast would be different from, however, although, on the other hand, as opposed to, more than, less than, and neither. So these are our clue words for compare and contrast. There are more words that we could maybe find in a text that could also be clue words, but for the purpose of this lesson, we're going to be focusing on these clue words, and maybe when we begin our activity and read our two texts, maybe you guys can spot these clue words and it can help you be able to realize the comparison and the contrasting information between the topics of our text. So the definition of compare is to state that something is similar to something else. So when we're comparing, we are stating that something is similar to it. And for contrast, the definition is to state that something is different to something else. So these definitions are very similar, just two different words, or just one different word in each definition. So for contrast, we are stating that something is different than something else. So unlike compare, we are stating something is different as opposed to stating something that is similar. So it's important to remember contrast means different. So when we're reading, ask yourself, what is being compared in the text? What are the similarities? And what are the differences between the topic of the text? Of those, what are the most significant similarities and differences? And how does this text structure help me to understand this text? So our example, we're going to go over this example short little text, and as I'm reading it, I want you guys to think of some similarities you see and some differences that you see in this short little text. And then when I'm done reading, we'll go over these similarities and differences. Although both ice cream and veggies are both food, ice cream is less healthy and eaten as a dessert. Veggies, however, are a side dish to a meal. So in our short little text right here, we are comparing and contrasting ice cream and veggies. So I want you guys to take a moment to read over this one more time. Pause the video and read over it one more time out loud or in your head, and really think about the similarities between the two and the differences. When you unpause, we will go over the similarities and differences. All right, our similarities for this short little text are that ice cream and veggies are both food. Our differences are ice cream is less healthy and is eaten as a dessert. Veggies are healthier and they're a side dish to a meal. We don't eat veggies for dessert. Some people might, but I know I do not eat veggies as a dessert. I eat ice cream as a dessert. So that is a difference between the two. That ice cream is less healthy and eaten as a dessert, and veggies are healthier and eaten as a side dish to a meal. So you guys should have a thought of these similarities and differences, and this shows how this is only 2 sentences, and even in these 2 short little sentences, it shows that 2 things can be compared and contrasted in a very, very short text. And we can also compare and contrast something in a long text as well. There's no limit to it. So when identifying compare and contrast, we must be able to define compare and contrast and use similar terms relating to compare and contrast. These words being, or these terms being like, unlike, similar, difference, and likewise. We also must be able to identify the topics being compared and contrasted. So if we're reading a text and we haven't been able to identify the 2 topics that are being compared and contrasted, then we are going to be able to identify the similarities or identify the differences. Our first step is to identify the topics being compared and contrasted. So again, we also must be able to identify similarities and identify differences between the 2. All right, pause the video and grab a piece of paper and a pencil, and we are going to practice. Okay, so for our on our piece of paper and for our practice, we are going to be using a Venn diagram. A Venn diagram is something we've used in the past through Sun Devil Learning Labs, something you guys should be a little bit familiar with. And what I would like you guys to do is take your piece of paper and draw a Venn diagram similar to the one on the screen. And our topic of our text is bread. And we are going to be comparing bread back then, bread in the history, bread's history and what bread used to be like. And we are going to be comparing bread now. So in your Venn diagram, I want you guys to have bread then on one side and bread now on the other. And then in the middle, we have both. Because in the middle, we are going to write the similarity, or we are going to write what bread then and bread now have similar to one another. And then on each of their sides, for bread then, you'll write the characteristics that are unique to bread then. And then on bread now, you'll write the characteristics similar to it stated in the text. So take a moment, if you haven't done so already, pause the screen and draw your Venn diagram, please. Similar to the one exactly like I have here on our screen. And you guys will be filling that in as I read our text. Okay, so as I'm reading the text, as always, be sure to pay close attention to what I'm saying. If I'm reading too fast, go ahead and pause the video and read it in your head or read it out loud. Look up any words you're unfamiliar with, and also be sure to be filling in your Venn diagram as I read. So bread baking now and then. Did you know that bread is one of the earliest human inventions? Bread is a food made of flour and water. Other ingredients and shapes can vary. Scientists have learned that humans have been eating bread in some form or another for 30,000 years. Ancient Egyptians ate a lot of bread. In fact, because they had no potatoes or rice, bread was the most important carbohydrate source in the ancient Egyptians' diet. Egypt gets little rain. Ancient Egyptian farmers relied on the annual flooding of the Nile River to irrigate their fields. Egyptian farmers paid a portion of their grain harvest to the Egyptian treasury. Archaeologists have discovered illustrations of bakeries and loaves of bread in ancient Egyptian burial sites. Professional bakers and home bakers use the same production techniques. Home bakers, usually women, baked only the bread they would need for that day. Egyptians used a grain from emmer wheat for their bread. The grain was ground by hand on millstone. This process cracked and crushed the grain into coarse flour. The flour was mixed with water and sometimes a little old dough. It was placed in a pot and baked in a clay oven. Okay, so in these first paragraphs, you guys should have gained some information about bread then and filled that into your Venn diagram. Again, if you need to, go ahead and pause the video and read over the text on your own, or pull some ideas from the text to write into your Venn diagram. The Egyptian bread was a flatbread. Indian naan and Middle Eastern pita are two examples of flatbreads eaten today. At the end of the ancient Egyptian period, however, around 300 BC, Egyptian bakers added to their bread an important ingredient: yeast. Yeast is a microscopic fungus. It's really, really small, and it makes bread rise. Today, bread production is more complicated. Yes, you can still make bread. You can still make your bread at home with store-bought flour and yeast. You can also buy bread made at small bakeries. But the fluffy bread you see in grocery stores in the United States is made in large commercial facilities. These commercial facilities or plants have business contracts to make many different brands of bread. Most breads today are made using 4 basic ingredients: flour, yeast, salt, and water. Farmers across the United States grow wheat in large quantities. Half of the wheat produced in the United States. The other half is exported to other countries. Grain is processed into flour by companies, which then sell the flour to commercial bakeries. These bakeries produce the dough and bake the bread, then package it and arrange it for its distribution to stores. So in these texts, you guys should have gained some information about bread now, bread today, and we should write that into our Venn diagram. And we also should have been able to notice some similarities between bread back then and bread today. If your Venn diagram is not complete, go ahead and pause. Okay, so for our Venn diagram, we are going to be comparing and contrasting bread then and bread now. In the middle, we have the similarities of both, and on the outskirts, on the outside of each of the middle circle, we have the differences between the two. So the characteristics that are unique to bread then and bread now. So let's start with going over bread then. You guys might not have the same information written down as me, but we should have pretty similar information. If you guys don't have the same information as me or very differing information, go ahead and write in some of the information I have written down just to use as a reference and just to see the correct answers that we would have for our Venn diagram. So for bread then, it was made of flour and water. It was baked in a clay oven. It was extremely popular in Egypt. And the grain used was grounded by hand. Now let's go over to bread now. Bread production now is more complicated. There are many brands of bread. Breads are made in facilities, at home, and at bakeries. So bread then was not made in facilities, and today it is made in facilities and distributed to different stores in the United States. That's where we get our bread for sandwiches and stuff like that. It is made of 4 main ingredients, which are flour, salt, yeast, and water. And the similarities of the two, so the similarities are listed in the middle. We should have something similar to these similarities. Bread was one of the earliest human inventions. Bread is a very popular food, and both have flour and water as ingredients. So even though bread now has a couple added ingredients, bread back then and bread now still both used flour and water. So that could be another one of our similarities when we are comparing the two. So if you guys need to take a moment to pause the video and write in any information you might be missing from your Venn diagram, go ahead and take that time to do so. Let's go over what we learned today in our lesson. Today we learned how to recognize the characteristics of the text structure, compare and contrast. We learned the importance of the text structure, compare and contrast, and why authors use it. We learned clue words to help us as readers identify that compare and contrast is present in a text. And we learned how to use a Venn diagram to compare and contrast similarities and differences in a text. So we used our Venn diagram through our activity, and we were able to find the similarities and the differences of bread back in old times and bread eaten today. We looked at some clue words that we could use to help us notice that compare and contrast is in a text, and that is a text structure being used. And we learned the overall importance of compare and contrast. Awesome job today, guys. I hope you enjoyed our lesson, and I will see you back soon. Bye-bye.